They made it. So, thank you. Again, I'm Nora. I've already covered one logistic for restrooms at the top of the ramp there. Also, as you're mingling here after our presentation, on the doors of our garden court here, there is a presentation of how we have been renovating done a grounds restoration project here on our grounds to remove invasive species and repopulate using native species. There is a complete rundown of that for how to do it in your own home as well, and some printouts are in the back under the All Things St. Luke sign on that counter space. If you'd like to take one of those with you, you're certainly welcome to. That is, I believe, all I have this evening for you. Thank you again for being here. I've been asked to say a few centering words as we are this communal body of faith in action to preserve life and this beloved creation we have. So would you join me in the spirit of prayer? Holy source of life, spirit that offers us living water to sustain and grow, open our hearts this evening for new ways to innovate and live our lives, recognizing the gifts that are around us. Help us to use those gifts for the betterment of our world. Amen. That's all for me, folks. I'm going to be in the back working on some tech stuff, and I'm going to turn it over to Jackie Smolin, who is the chair of the Climate Justice team from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Minnetonka. Jackie?
Thank you, Pastor Nora. It's my job to tell you a little bit about our sponsors. West Metro Climate Hub is a diverse consortium of faith communities with a mission to support congregations in dealing with the climate crisis. We include Gethsemane Lutheran, Beth Shalom, Excelsior United Methodist Church, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Minnetonka, St. Luke Presbyterian, the Edina Community Lutheran, and Pax Christi. Our speakers tonight come from Fresh Energy, which is devoted to shaping and driving bold policy solutions to achieve equitable carbon-neutral economics, renewable energy, and clean transportation. Our two speakers today, Anjali Baines is the lead director of the Energy Access and Equity team at Fresh Energy, a clean energy advocacy nonprofit based in St. Paul, Minnesota. As part of this EAE team, Anjali works across policy programs to ensure that the solutions we advocate for at the state legislature and regulatory arenas include the underrepresented perspectives and benefit all Minnesotans, particularly those most vulnerable to climate change. Anjali got her start in Fresh Energy working on electric transportation issues. Prior to Fresh Energy, she worked in the private solar development and finance sector in California and Maryland. Our second speaker is Eric Fowler. He is a senior policy associate in Fresh Energy's building departments. There, he brings his expertise to focus on policies supporting building electrification and market transformation, as well as improvements to energy efficiency that facilitate fuel switching. Eric joined Fresh Energy in 2021 and played a key role in growing the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, housed at Fresh Energy. Before joining the Buildings Department, Eric also supported Fresh Energy's public affairs team and had a leadership role in advancing a new building electrification bill at the Minnesota legislature in 2022. Before Fresh Energy, Eric worked at the Chicago Jobs Council for 6 years, managing external communications and leading advocacy to reduce transportation barriers to employment. I'd like you all to welcome our speakers tonight. Afterwards, we will have a question and answer, so hang on to your questions. We'll get to them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for spending your evening with us here. We are really glad to have you. We have only ever given this with a PowerPoint before, which we completely failed to notify our very gracious hosts here, so.
Yeah, this is actually the first time we're doing this presentation personally, realized, and not virtually. And it didn't occur to us until about 5 minutes ago.
So there'll be a couple times where we're probably going to talk about some numbers that you are not going to be able to see. And we apologize for that in advance. We will make sure to send all of that out afterwards. The vast majority of the slides, you know, are more decoration. We'll be fine without them.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you again for having us here and introducing us. So we're here on behalf of Fresh Energy. For those of you who don't know, Fresh Energy has been working on clean energy and climate policy issues here in Minnesota.
So sorry. So you need to be right in front of this microphone. So there you go.
Okay, is this a good distance? Also, it's been quite the week, so we are going to probably both read mostly off a prepared script for this. Apologies for that in advance, but we will inject as much enthusiasm into this presentation as possible. All right, so Fresh Energy. We have been working on clean energy and climate policy solutions in Minnesota and throughout the Midwest for 30 years. And we're changing the world through bold policy solutions that move us to a just carbon-free future. So we tend to be experts in clean energy issues, both at the state legislature and in what we call regulatory arenas. So that'd be something like the Public Utilities Commission or with state agencies. We're hoping that through our policy work, we will build a future that is just and carbon-free and that helps everyone who lives here end their dependence on fossil fuel, electrify their lives, and build a healthy, clean energy economy where we can all thrive. With the urgency of climate change so clear today, we're committed to looking forward and moving farther faster. The reality of extreme weather fueled by climate change is not lost on Minnesotans. So you guys can't see this, but there is a picture of a roadway flooded by heavy rainfall. We're experiencing the effects of climate change throughout the state, from the Iron Range up north down to Mankato and back up to the Twin Cities, in the very neighborhoods many of us and our neighbors call home. It's not something that merely impacts our cities. It also has very real impacts on the health of communities across greater Minnesota as well. In particular, extreme weather fueled by climate change dampens the rich traditions that make Minnesota and the Midwest an agricultural heartland, impacting our neighbors and families as crops are stifled by extreme weather like the heavy rainfall and prolonged droughts. We see the effects of climate change on the health of our natural lands around us too, including in some of our favorite, most protected natural landscapes, like the state and regional parks we can't wait to explore each year, which tend to be more vulnerable to invasive species as certain plants and animals come up from the south. And we see the effects of climate change most clearly and are often most woken up to its reality when we are confronted with the danger it poses to our families and neighborhoods, whether by construction of our communities or by playing a role in polluting the air we breathe or the water we drink. So, as many of you may know, the US has by far the largest amount of cumulative carbon emissions in the world. So that means over our entire history of any country in the world, we've put the most carbon emissions into the atmosphere. The Midwest region in particular remains incredibly high, which means that we all have a crucial role to play in reducing emissions moving forward. The data shows that if the Midwest was its own country, we would actually be ranked the 5th largest country emitting greenhouse gases in the world, ranking between Russia and Japan. So that is a very big role for the Midwest to play. Oh yeah, and the top emitters is China, number 1, US, number 2, 3, India, 4, Russia, and if the Midwest was its own country, we would be number 5. The good news is it doesn't have to be this way, and it certainly doesn't have to get worse. This is where Fresh Energy and our work come in. We're using policy change to tackle the root causes of our high emissions, and we're doing that in several different ways. So Fresh Energy's work encompasses creating a carbon-free electricity system in the near term with renewable power replacing coal and other polluting fossil fuels and building the grid of the future. 2, harnessing modern energy efficiency opportunities and moving carbon-intensive parts of our economy, like transportation and heating, onto clean electricity. 3, ensuring a just and equitable energy transition for marginalized communities. And 4, building a shared commitment to climate action by catalyzing support for a carbon neutral economy, or, as we like to say, moving folks from education to action. We've got entire teams at Fresh Energy laser focused in on these issues, using their skills as attorneys, scientists, engineers, and advocates to turn the tide so we can help protect Minnesotans and the communities and natural spaces we love. So let's zoom into Minnesota again. The mission, sorry, some of the scripts are specific to the presentation. So the emission landscape here in Minnesota from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency shows that across the last about 13 years, emissions from 4 sectors dropped, with the greatest drop in electricity. Transportation emissions declined a little bit as well, but now among all the sectors of our economy, which includes transportation, electricity generation, agriculture, industrial uses, residential and commercial buildings, as well as waste, transportation is the #1 source of carbon emissions in Minnesota and actually nationally as well. This is really important because we have to keep in mind that the world's top scientists have told us that emissions across every single sector have to drop by about 50% by 2030, which is now 7 years away, and we have to reach net zero by 2050. There's also been some not great trends in other parts of our sectors in Minnesota. So agriculture and forestry related emissions have dropped as well, but not enough, and that is a new area of focus for Fresh Energy. We actually have a new industry team that was launched in the end of the year because we recognize that that is an area that needs to have a little bit more policy work and research put into it. Unfortunately, we are also seeing trends in the industrial and building sectors, that's commercial and residential builders, go in the wrong direction, which is increasing, which is why the work that Eric does is really important, because home heating is a large contributor to those increases. So, now that we have a much cleaner electricity supply, the solution to tackling decarbonization across the other sectors is to electrify where we can, which brings us to what's happening at the federal level.
Yeah, so over the past year or so, we have watched a lot of big changes happen at the federal level. Among them is the infrastructure bill that was bipartisan that passed before the bill that we're here to talk about tonight. So that had some really critical, important climate investments in it. It basically deserves its own presentation, which we're not giving tonight, but that led up to, does everyone remember the period, if you were following the news, where Joe Manchin was Lucy with the football, and it was, is something gonna pass, is it not? There was Build Back Better. There were all these different policy ideas, and it really seemed like nothing was gonna happen. And then on, let's see, July 27th, 2022, after we watched that Peanuts cartoon happen over and over in the news, Senate leadership announced that there was a budget reconciliation deal in the form of the Inflation Reduction Act. Oh, look at that. Amazing.
Yes, for the best part.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, so it'll be federal action on climate and energy.
So slide 11.
Thank you so much.
Climate emissions.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome.
Awesome. Oh, that's super helpful.
Thank you.
And then, and we can actually go to the next slide. Yeah, so there was that surprise announcement that we were all pretty excited about, and it's worth shouting out that our delegation to Congress here from Minnesota played a key leadership role in helping make the Inflation Reduction Act possible. Special shout out to our senators, Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar. Senator Smith is part of the, I think they called themselves the Don't Give Up Caucus, and she is also involved in the Federal Electrification Caucus. And so really thoughtful leaders, and and then also we got votes on the IRA from Representatives Craig, McCollum, Phillips, and Omar as well. So we we did finally get to what I feel like is not reported with as much enthusiasm as it could be, the fact that this is historic, the largest by far investment in the energy transition that the United States has ever made. So the Inflation Reduction Act is making huge investments to push in the directions that we've been wanting to see for years, and it certainly doesn't get all the way there. But we're excited to share with you some of the consumer-facing pieces of this legislation, which again are really going to help to push the economy in the direction that we need. Let's see.
And just kind of when you consider it in conjunction with the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed last year, it's pretty incredible the billions that we are investing as a country towards climate change, electrification, in the course of really 2 short years. So yeah, it's very historic, and it's something to celebrate as much as we are still working through the details.
Yeah. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so the IRA, like we said, it is game-changing. It was signed into law on August 16th of 2022. And this is, there's $369 billion in there for climate, and there's tax provisions as well. The estimates that we have are that this is going to reduce emissions by the best estimates is that this is going to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030, and it is, so I think it's somewhere around 273 pages, so we're not going to cover every single part of it. But there are hundreds of policies and programs that are aimed at pushing consumers as well as industry in this direction of decarbonization and electrification. The big pieces we're going to talk about are going to be rebates and tax credits mostly to electrify your life in your home and in your transportation. Next slide. Okay, so this is great. So this is the chart that Anjali was talking about, but that we didn't get to show. And when I first saw this, I found it so striking. You can use the arrows at the bottom to cheat, because it tells you with each industry the direction that it's heading. And so while transportation, which is on the left, it's a little hard to read. Transportation is on the left. It's a bigger piece of the pie than buildings, but it's shrinking, right? The emissions of the transportation sector are shrinking. Buildings, which my team is responsible for doing advocacy and research around, emissions from buildings still today in 2023 continue to rise, which means that our task is turning that around like the other sectors, which are, gratefully, starting to shrink. So this is part of why the Inflation Reduction Act is going to incentivize consumers with rebates and tax credits to end dependence on fossil fuel and get carbon out of our lives, out of our personal lives, in our transportation and in our homes. Let's see. So we can go to the next slide. A little bit of context, this will probably be basic for some folks, but it is worth noting that these graphs cover carbon dioxide that is the largest contributor to climate change. However, there are other greenhouse gases that we need to think about as well. Those include methane, nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases. So methane, methane is natural gas, right? That is the key component of fossil gas is what we often call it, or natural gas is the industry branded term for it. Methane is 80 times better at keeping the earth warm than carbon dioxide over the first 20 years in the atmosphere. So you think about that, right? It's not as big a part of the puzzle because there's just so much more carbon dioxide that we're putting in the atmosphere. But the methane really sets the pace for how fast warming is happening in these next few years, because molecule for molecule, it is a much better blanket for the earth than carbon dioxide is. Methane is a stronger greenhouse gas. We also, nitrous oxide is another one. We're also going to be talking a little bit about NOx emissions, which are, maybe some folks have heard some of the recent news about gas stoves. So we will, just giving a preview of some of the other emissions we're going to be talking about. Okay, we can go to the next slide. One other caveat that we do want to just share is that we are not tax preparers, and we are also not construction contractors. So we're going to give you some information about what is in the IRA, but for your personal individual situation, it is still worth talking to your own tax professionals and to your own contractors about what to work on in your home. So we'll cover those consumer-specific evidence. The other pause is about whether or not to wait for some of these incentives. Okay, because some of what is in the Inflation Reduction Act isn't available just yet. So it might be easy to think, oh, well, let me wait until that incentive kicks in. Let me wait until the money flows down from the federal government and the state is running the rebate program, and let me wait for that. A little caution around waiting. We're really excited that they're incentivizing these electrification technologies to move away from fossil fuels, but the IRA's economy-wide, system-wide change, it's going to break things. There's going to be growing pains in the industries that are most affected. We already know that there's been supply chain issues with some things. We're seeing that. The contractors who already know how to electrify your home and install a heat pump, they're getting booked out really far. So it could, you could look at waiting a lot longer, and maybe prices are going to go up and eat away at some of those incentives a little bit. So all of this is to say that the place to start is what are the design needs of your home, and then take the incentives. Then think about the incentives. We don't want to just chase these incentives. Again, we're thrilled that they were passed and that they're available to help you out in this process. But you don't want to just go after something because there's a big discount on it, if that makes sense. I like the advice of Nate, the House Whisperer, or Nate Adams is someone I follow online. He's a home performance and electrification contractor, and one of the things he says is always design first and then consider the incentives. Next slide. So that relates to making an electrification plan. And one of the biggest pieces of this is to really think about that with your heating, ventilation, and cooling, or your HVAC. Something that might be really simple to switch out is, if you have the right electrical supply in your kitchen, so that you can switch from a gas stove to an electric stove or an induction stove, that's going to be more of a one-to-one replacement, right? That doesn't affect the rest of your building. Where it can become really important to make a plan is if you are going to update your HVAC system to a modern cold climate heat pump system. Here's where we start to think about the order of operations, and where it can be really helpful to make that plan is you may need to think, well, do I need to upgrade my electric panel? And how leaky is my house? Am I going to get this new system and then half of the energy is just leaking right through my walls and my windows? So you want to weatherize, you want to insulate and tighten up your house before or alongside the installation of a heat pump. That's one caveat that I like to make sure is clear. And there are folks that can help you with that. Ideally, maybe some folks are already familiar with the Center for Energy and Environment's Home Energy Squad. I have had them out to my own home. Your utility is going to have an energy audit that you can do in your home, and that will help you make this plan to prioritize, okay, I need to focus on my windows, and then I'll update my heating and cooling system. Yeah, and the good news is that the IRA also has money to help not only with some of that electric equipment, but also with that insulation, if that's something that you're going to need to do first. Next slide.
Awesome, thanks, Eric. Yeah, energy efficiency is really important, and we'll talk more about it later. We had a 2-hour meeting about it today with utilities and advocates and community members, so a really important part of the electrification puzzle. Another really exciting thing with the IRA, especially around the consumer components around it, is that it focused a lot more on equitable access this time around, so that making sure that more folks who hadn't necessarily benefited from tax credits in the past could actually access and benefit from these tax credits and rebates. And there's 3 main ways that this is happening. So the first is that the IRA contains both tax credits and rebates. The reason why this is important is because tax credits, while they're helpful, require, one, that you have a higher tax liability to take full advantage of some of the tax credits, and 2, you don't get that money back immediately. You purchase the thing, you apply for the tax credit on your tax returns, and then you get it back in the form of the return. So there's a gap between, buying something and then actually getting the benefits from a tax credit. The good thing about them, especially with the IRA, is that we know how tax credits work, so the systems to process them and get them out there to the public is going to happen quicker than the rebates. But the good thing about rebates is that some of them are point of sale, so that means they can actually be applied before you purchase something, so you're actually getting a discount off of home electrification or electric vehicle at the point of purchase. And this is really important because it means you're getting that discount right away instead of having to wait for the tax season to get it back. The rebates and tax credits are also helpful in that they can be used by renters and property owners alike. So it's not just for property owners, renters themselves can take advantage of these rebates and purchase and install equipment as well, which is really helpful when we think about multifamily buildings and appliances and all the work that needs to go into making sure they are also electrified and efficient. The second biggest thing is that most of these tax credits and rebates will be in effect for the next nine years at this point, so through 2031 or 2032, which allows for longer term planning. In the past, sometimes rebates or tax credits would be 5 years or even a few years, which can make it a really quick process to try to take advantage of. But as Eric said, they will be there, there's time to plan for it, and we will basically have almost 10 years to plan for and use these tax credits and rebates. And the good thing is that there is annual caps to these tax credits and rebates. So in a single year, you might only be able to, say, claim up to $15,000 in tax credits for some of these programs. But what you don't have to worry about is a cap over the lifetime of the program. So you could strategically plan your electrification and say, I'm going to use this amount of tax credits in year 1, in year 2, I'll use these tax credits, and really maximize the amount of tax credits you get or rebates in a given year. So it's an annual cap, it is not a program cap, so you can really think about when to time purchases to take full advantage of this program. And the final thing that is really exciting from an equity perspective is that there is now income eligibility component to many of the rebates, specifically, not the tax credits, but the rebates. And that's to really prioritize access for under-resourced customers, which is a term Fresh Energy uses for those with lower incomes, as well as those who haven't traditionally been able to benefit or partake in clean energy programs to date. So many of the rebate programs are specifically geared towards recipients who have or who are below 150%, for instance, of area median income, and that's just a common way of tracking income in the U.S. Going back to rebates, so as I mentioned, tax credits. We've done tax credits at the federal level before. It will happen fairly quickly to get them set up. I believe some of them are already set up for you to take advantage of in the upcoming, probably not for 2022, but probably for 2023 it'll be set up. But rebates are brand new. So this is a lot of the rebates will be brand new. So there will need to be entire programs set up by states and tribal nations to actually get the rebates in the hands of consumers. That's what Eric was saying, that it might take some time to get from federal level to state level to consumers. And there might be differences in between states as well. So here in Minnesota, we're making sure that our state agencies are working hard to get those programs set up as soon as possible. We're actually lobbying in the state legislative session. This actually right now is active right now. We're lobbying for additional funds to complement these programs and make sure there's sufficient funding out for Minnesotans who are interested, and that agencies have money to actually staff up and design these programs from the ground up. All right, I think that is the main parts of the equitable assets of IRA and how they fit into our decarbonization puzzle, so I'll hand it back over to Eric.
Thank you. So next slide. And so here, a little bit of a reminder again on the importance of buildings is, yes, they are a smaller piece of the puzzle than, for example, transportation. But buildings do still make up about 40% of US greenhouse gas emissions. And there's something that a lot of us have a say over, right? At our kitchen table, thinking about our own homes, or in our worship spaces, or in our businesses, and also thinking back to the Midwest's outsized role, right? We do a lot of heating with gas, and about 75% of houses and about 68% of businesses in the Midwest are powered by fossil gas. And the other thing about the fuel burning appliances in our buildings is that they generate a lot of air pollution, including nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, something I didn't practice how to pronounce, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, volatile organic compounds, and particulate matter, which some of the worst stuff you might see as PM 2.5, which stands for the 2.5 is how incredibly tiny that is, and the PM is particulate matter. So these are super harmful to our health. I actually, I'm going off script a little bit here, but when I first started at Fresh Energy, I remember being really wowed seeing a study that said the energy transition away from fossil fuels would be worth it even if climate change didn't exist, simply because of the human health impact of air quality from burning fossil fuels, right? And we're burning those in our homes, in our churches, at our work, synagogue, right? All the time. So the air pollution piece of this is also really important to remember as another impact besides the climate emissions. Again, buildings, we need to turn around those emissions. We need to start bringing them down, get them on the same trajectory as the other sectors. So next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. And I'm going to go off script once more, because something that we have mentioned now a couple times, but I don't actually want to take for granted, is heat pumps. So maybe this is, you all chose to be here for a reason, and so maybe everybody already knows about heat pumps. But can I see a show of hands, if you're willing, for who is hearing about heat pumps for the first time tonight? Yeah, some questions, some uncertainty? Absolutely. So I'm gonna go off a little bit here, and before talking about why, before talking about the amounts of money that we're putting into making these products more accessible, maybe I should share why these products are so important. So a heat pump, and there are some more slides that touch on some of this, but I think it's better to have a quick preview now as we're thinking about why we would incentivize a heat pump. A heat pump is an air conditioner that can go in two different directions, right? So when you think about your fridge, when you think about your window air conditioning, what is that doing? It's doing some compression, and somehow, through some kind of magic, it is moving heat from one place to another. And with air conditioning, it's usually moving heat out of your home and then dumping it outside. All we're doing with a heat pump is taking those same principles. They've been tweaked, they've been improved, but it's really the same thing, so that now in the winter, you use those same coils, you have compressor, you have evaporator, and now, even if it's 20 degrees outside, there's still heat. That's not like, is it Kelvin that goes down to zero? With absolute zero? Right, yeah. 20 degrees Fahrenheit is not the same thing as absolute zero. So there is still heat outside in the winter. And so a heat pump is just going to scoop that heat, and it's just going to pull it inside the same way that your fridge already pulls heat out of a cold place and dumps it into a warmer place. And with that, you're going to get like 300% efficiency compared to running those same electrons through a resistance wire and just heating it up, right? So that's why we're so excited about heat pumps. So thanks for going on that detour with me. So up here are some of the incentives that are in the IRA to help move us to this electric future. So the high efficiency electric home rebate program, this is what we referenced a little bit before. At the federal level, there is $4.5 billion in direct rebates for low and moderate income households to purchase the products that are listed up on here. And in case it's a little small, I'll read those out in just a second. So the key thing to remember here is that if you are 150% of area median income or below, you will be able to use these rebates. So that means it's not exclusively if you are super under-resourced or lower income. The benefit does increase if you are even lower, if you are below 80% of area median income, but you don't need to be below 80% in order to use some of the rebates. So some of these benefits are, and the total is going to be up to $14,000 per household per year. And so that's $8,000 towards a heat pump. So again, this is if you want to transition your space heating and cooling. The other nice thing about the heat pump is now it does both. Now you have one unit that does both your heating and your cooling. $1,750 for a heat pump water heater. So same concept. You can get a traditional electric water heater, and you can power that with a solar panel or with electrons from a wind turbine as well. But if you want the extra efficiency, you can get a heat pump water heater. $840 for heat pump clothes dryer, $840 for electric or induction stoves. And then there's also rebates for improvements to your electric panel, your wiring, to your insulation, right? These are all related projects. Let's see. Okay. Thank you. As we, yep. Yes, next slide. Okay. So in addition to the rebates, there are tax credits. And again, like we've mentioned, there's trade-offs to both of them. So it's kind of nice that we have both, so that you get some of these different benefits. The rebates, a whole new system is going to have to be built, and so we're still waiting for those rebates to be rolled out. But these tax credits are available now. So anything that you do starting January 1st, 2023, that is on this list, you can now qualify for these tax credits if you make some of these improvements. So that would include an energy audit, an electric panel upgrade, if you do weatherization work on your home, there's a $1,200 tax credit for that. There is also a separate one for heat pump installation, and that actually can be on top of the rebate. So once the rebates are established, you'll actually be able to stack these benefits, which is another really helpful piece of the program. And again, these credits reset each year, which in previous similar programs, oftentimes that's not been the case. It's been, you can use this much of it in your entire lifetime, and then you're done. Whereas we're really excited about these because it does reset each year. Sorry, see, we go in person, and I can't, I have a harder time following the script compared to when I'm on Zoom. When I'm on Zoom, I just go by the script, but yeah. Okay, next slide.
Thank you. And actually, if you want to click 3 more times, let's just get all the animations up here. Thank you. So yeah, we're going back to energy efficiency, which is the topic we all love to talk about here. So as a reminder, we just went over energy efficiency, electrification, and these are really important because to really take a full advantage of these products, as Eric already talked about, we really need to make a plan so homes have the highest level of performance and efficiencies so that these rebates are actually going to have the biggest kind of effect on your energy bills and on making your home a better place to live. So it wouldn't make any sense to put in these high efficiency heat pumps without upgrading your insulation weatherization. That would be money and energy wasted. And why is this? Why is energy efficiency such a big deal? It's really the cornerstone of decarbonization because the cleanest energy is the energy you don't use. And it not only lowers your energy bill, but as I mentioned, is foundational for the rest of the electrification work. Good energy efficiency could slash U.S. energy use and greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2050 alone. So it is a huge part of the decarbonization goals that we are working towards. It's not as, it's not as sexy as electric vehicles or electrification, but is probably the workhorse of everything we need to do around decarbonization. It's also the cheapest and the fastest way to meet growing energy demand while reducing that pollution that Eric was mentioning that drives dangerous climate change and harms our health. All right, I think that's about it. Energy efficiency.
Yeah.
Next slide.
So, and let's just do the same thing. I think it's 3 animations, maybe we can click through those. Thank you. So home heating and cooling is responsible for roughly 441 million tons of carbon dioxide annually. And in Minnesota, on average, homes heating with fossil gas produce up to 8,000 pounds of carbon dioxide. I believe that's per year. And then again, we have these pesky emissions, right? It's a whole laundry list of stuff that you do not want to breathe in and we do not want in the atmosphere. If we click once more, I think it's going to show that a leading edge residential air source heat pump can deliver 300 or more % efficiency. And again, that's because moving heat takes less energy than making heat. If the heat is already there, we can just scoop it up and bring it inside. So next slide. So now we also have to heat our water, which is another fairly large piece of the home energy puzzle. If we click, I think 3 times, sorry about these animations. So the 58 million US water heaters that use fossil gas leak about 91,000 tons of methane per year. So that's another thing that I think about with these gas systems, right? They're also leaky. So it's not just what you burn, it also, there are losses that are just going out into the atmosphere. Emissions from fossil gas water heaters include all the emissions, that we talked about before. The good news is that air source heat pump water heaters are 7 times more efficient than gas and 3.5 times more efficient than standard electric water heaters. So next slide is very exciting. We're on to cooking. Okay, so this has been in the news quite a bit. It's been fascinating to watch this dialogue play out. The short version, if you did miss it, is that somebody made a comment at the federal level that, products that can't be made safe can be regulated and can be banned in reference to gas stoves. And then some media outlets translated that offhand comment from a regular to mean the federal government is coming to take away your gas stoves, which was a little funny to watch. But what's not funny is actually how seriously harmful to health the emissions from gas stoves are. They do leak. Again, even when they're not running, like I mentioned with the water heaters. Gas stoves put 2.6 million tons of methane into the air each year. The methane leaking has a climate impact comparable to the carbon dioxide emission from 500,000 cars. And again, with this laundry list of nasty emissions, with stoves, because they're not in your basement or they're not in your utility closet, they're right there by your face, they're right there by your family. And so with gas stoves in particular, we see a strong impact on asthma rates for especially young children. So studies have shown that kids living with a gas stove have a 42% increased risk of asthma symptoms and a 24% increased risk of being diagnosed with asthma. It's not that far from smoking inside. is what the research is showing increasingly. The good news is that induction cooktops are a little more efficient than traditional electric and way more efficient than gas. So if this is new to you, it's an interesting thing that you can look into. An induction stove is going to boil your water actually faster. It's not only as fast, but faster than a gas stove. It's going to give you a lot of control, and you're going to be able to power it with clean electrons.
Yeah, the health impacts of cooking gas is the first thing I learned about fresh energy. That just sort of floored me, especially since a lot of the older buildings in Minnesota and the Twin Cities. So I live in a rental unit that was built in the 1900s. They don't actually have any HVAC system above the stovetops. So when I'm cooking, I'm very aware that, well, one, the pilot light is always on, but when I'm cooking, that's just coming straight into my kitchen. And I've devised a sort of fan, open window system, air purifier, but it is something I started doing only after I learned about it at Fresh Energy. All right, next slide. So I'm going to talk about vehicles. We're going to switch away from buildings into the transportation side. And if we want to click 3 times again, so 2 more times. Perfect. So as I mentioned, transportation is the largest source of climate pollution, and it accounts for a staggering quarter of our overall emissions, with light-duty vehicles, like our passenger cars, contributing about 60% of the overall transportation sector emissions. Electric vehicles are a major way for us to decarbonize transportation alongside walkable and rollable communities where it's safe to travel by foot and by bike, as well as adding things like public transportation and trains, and then electrifying heavier duties as well, heavy-duty vehicles like trucks. A few factoids here that might be interesting. In addition to carbon dioxide, which we often speak about in terms of climate change, automobiles also produce methane and nitrous oxide, as we were just talking about from the natural gas side. So combustion of gasoline and diesel also contributes to those same sort of pollutants and greenhouse gases. And again, relatively small compared to carbon dioxide, but because of their warming potential, they have an outsized importance to get rid of. Great. The good news is EVs have a fully electric EV, so we're not talking about plug-in hybrids necessarily, but a battery electric EV, as they called, have no tailpipe emissions. So again, why don't we just get rid of any bad gases coming out from our vehicles? And it has a tremendous impact not only on climate change, but on our health as well. Communities of color and under-resourced communities tend to be the ones living closest to our highways, and that air pollution from all those trucks and passenger vehicles does drift to those vicinities. So kind of similar to how we think about indoor air pollution and how older homes have less or no HVAC systems are having the worst impacts on the indoor pollution. The same can be said about transportation pollution, where those folks who are living near the highways are experiencing the worst impacts from air pollution from our fuel choice. Next slide. So EVs are a great solution for taking away the tailpipe emissions. They are also overall have lower climate emissions than gasoline vehicles when we look at the life cycle. So that means production, operation over about a 10-year lifespan. And the reason why it's important to say this, and the reason we're going to talk about utilities for a little bit here, is that sometimes folks are wondering if a gas vehicle is truly worse than an electric vehicle when we think about that entire production or where electricity is generated. But the question really comes to be, well, isn't coal generating that electricity? So even though the emissions are happening a little bit somewhere else, it's still causing climate change and air pollution. That is not true for Minnesota. It hasn't been true for a couple decades now, which is great. You know, our electricity system is getting cleaner and cleaner, and in particular, the Twin Cities electric utility, Xcel Energy, has been decarbonizing pretty rapidly, and they've already committed to getting 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. So we know now that if you're charging your EVs on Minnesota's electric grid, you are saving climate change emissions, and it will only get better as we continue in the decade. So EVs are really the right climate solution when we think about reducing climate pollution and air pollution. Next slide. Okay, so that's me up on the slide. So we're going back to the IRA specifically and the specific rebates in there. So the first is this newly named Clean Vehicle Credit. This is a revamp of the existing EV credit that folks here may be familiar with. It's $7,500 at the federal level for a new EV. A major improvement to this tax credit is that it is actually now, despite being a tax credit, it is available at the point of sale through dealerships. So though I was mentioning before, the tax credits generally you were delayed. In this case, they decided to make it available at point of sale, which is pretty remarkable. But there's also now an income cap on who can use this credit. So individuals making up to $150,000 and households up to $300,000 are eligible. So again, it's not that no one will qualify for it. There's still a large proportion of the population who will qualify for it, but it's just, taking out the most wealthy parts of our population from being eligible. And this credit will be eligible through 2032. However, there are some other changes that are different from the previous tax credit. The main one is that this tax credit, because especially of advocacy from Joe Manchin, is meant to incentivize North American-made EVs. So it is split into two parts, and buyers will receive half of that $7,500 if the new vehicle is made with a certain percentage of battery components that are manufactured or assembled in North America, thus Canada, US, Mexico. And buyers will receive the second half of the rebate if the battery of the vehicle is constructed with a certain percentage of critical minerals that were either extracted in the US, extracted in a country that the US has a free trade agreement with, or that were recycled in North America. These percentage requirements increase over time relatively quickly, so there is going to be a need to kind of check what models are actually applicable for the new vehicle tax credit, but there are sites popping up to let know folks what's eligible for what amount that we can share after this, some really helpful resources so you can know exactly what make and models are eligible. There's also a great website, shift2electric.com, run by Fresh Energy's EV consultant and Midwest EV superstar Yuka Kukkonen, that some of you may be familiar with. He does a great job in education on EV makes and models. The second part of the IRA kind of new changes is that there's actually now a vehicle credit for previously owned vehicles. So it's basically a used EV credit. And this has never existed at the federal level, didn't exist before, so it's a really exciting addition as well as the revamped new vehicle credit. So this is a tax credit for up to $4,000 or 30% of the purchase price of a used electric vehicle, whichever is lower, with a price cap of $25,000 on that used EV, which is, if you look at the used EV market, it's not totally out of the question. You can find an EV at that amount of money. As Eric was mentioning, inflation and sort of a supply chain issue and high demand may make used vehicles sometimes go above this, but there will be those out there that will be at or below this price. The catch is that this credit is only available for used EVs bought through a certified dealer, so it's not something you can get if you're just buying an EV off of a consumer. So, a lot of folks will post their EVs on Facebook, so that sort of transaction wouldn't be eligible for the tax credit. It is also income qualified with an income cap of $75,000 for a single tax filer and $150,000 for joint tax filers. So it's about half of what the new EV tax credit. The good thing is that this credit does not have the same North American, good if you want more choices, does not have the same North American-made extracted component requirements that the new Clean Vehicle Tax Credit has. So this used vehicle tax credit is applicable to any and all makes and models. You don't have to worry about figuring out which one's qualified. Next slide. All right, we're coming to the end of our presentation. Thanks for bearing with us. So if you learned anything today, it should be 1, make a plan, especially if you're considering changes to your home. Do a home energy audit just to start off. A lot of utility programs actually will do an energy audit for you, so you can call up your electric utility or your gas utility and see if they can send over someone to do an energy audit. Get informed, so dig in to those elements of the IRA that you're interested in. Find those websites, find those pieces that are going to the details of what a heat pump is or which EVs are available under these tax credits. And don't forget that the timelines are going to be weird, and we're going to find out more as the year progresses. I think the latest I heard is that a lot of the home energy electrification rebates guidance will come out from federal government by the end of the year. So if the guidance is coming out from the end of the year, it'll be a bit of time before the states actually have programs set up. But we'll learn more as the year progresses, and hopefully we are pleasantly surprised by how quickly things moved. All right, next slide. We're going to go here really quickly. We're not going to spend too much time, but there's other things in the IRA. For instance, there is a residential clean energy tax credit for residential solar. That's a 30% tax credit for solar heating or electricity generation. That is similar to what's existed in federal law before, and it can also stack with those other energy tax credit. And next slide. And I think this is a new one. So there is now a new residential clean energy credit for battery storage, which did not exist before. So this is, again, a 30% tax credit up to a capacity of 3 kilowatt hours. And it can utilize any energy source and qualify for this. Next slide.
There are some ways that you can stay connected with us at Fresh Energy up on the screen, including scanning the QR code to subscribe to email updates from us. You can also text, email, just the word email, to the number on the screen, which is 833-898-6788. I think next slide is our last slide. Yes, so you are all now IRA ambassadors. As we've said, we're still learning as we go, but everyone in this room now knows more about what is in the IRA and why that is important. So we hope that you will spread this information, bring it up with someone who seems interested in doing one of these projects. And then if anyone is interested, we do include this final note about how to become a donor to Fresh Energy, and we do have some fun Fresh Energy socks, which I should have worn them today, but they have wind turbines and solar panels on them. And so those we send out with a donation of $20 or more. Again, really grateful for your attention and your interest. And I think that's it, and I think we're open for questions.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
I have the mic, so before people start having to yell so we can all hear you, just raise your hand, and Marilyn has a mic over there, and I have a mic here, so.
Also, we will be sharing these slides after the fact, so the information will be shared with some useful links and resources.
Okay, you said that the IRA has enough tax incentives to cause a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. What's the benchmark? 40% of what? What level is?
Yeah, I keep forgetting that. We will get back to you. I was thinking about that when I was.
All right, good. And then one more question with regard to the heat pump appliances. Who services those?
So the the contractor who installs them would be the best folks to service them. It is a air conditioning that can go in both directions, and so from a technical perspective, oftentimes the number of parts, it's like you need the parts to make it be able to go in reverse. So it should be serviceable by the installers pretty readily. That is a learning curve. Not all contractors are going to be totally familiar if you ask about heat pump installation. I had a plumber to get a quote for heat pump water heaters in my basement to replace my gas water heater, which is about 30 years old, and I'm knocking on wood because, well, it's 30 years old. But I had to argue a little bit. This plumber wasn't super familiar with the heat pump technology. So I suppose this is maybe not the nicest, wrapped up in a bow, easiest answer to your question. I wish I could say that every single contractor you talk to is already going to be super familiar and comfortable with the technology. Obviously, that is not the case. But once you get to find someone who is going to install it, then I would hope that they would be ready to service it as well.
Yeah, I've got a question. I think I was next. Thank you. Good information, and you packed a lot in there. That was great. A couple comments and a question. One, I think the point of purchase $7,500 rebate on the cars doesn't kick in until 2024. So the tax rebate, I think, is operating right now, and then it changes a little bit in March, but it's not until next year that you actually get the instant point of purchase rebate. For those of you who have gas stoves and you don't have an exhaust hood, it's pretty foul, the air that you get in your kitchen after cooking with these things for a little while. If you want to reduce the poisons that you're ingesting, go get on Amazon or at IKEA a portable induction cooktop. They work great. As long as you've got pans that a magnet will stick to, which means you have iron in them, you can cook with these little portable cooktops. Are about $100, $200, and they work great. Then my question about the rebates. Is Fresh Energy working with a government agency to kind of hit the ground running when the Fed makes these funds available? Because it's millions of dollars for consumers in Minnesota. I'm hoping that you guys are working with an agency, and who do you work with to make that program available to consumers?
Yeah, so our energy office for Minnesota is in the Department of Commerce, and so we're in conversation with the Department of Commerce about how they're thinking about designing these rebates. I have to confess, personally, I'm very curious how we're going to exactly implement point of sale income based rebates. That is exciting for a number of reasons and potentially challenging for a number of reasons, but that's at the Department of Commerce that we work, we have good relationships and work pretty regularly with them.
And I can just add to that. So I think our first focus is on the state budget and getting some of the $17 billion surplus money towards, again, kind of expanding what state energy offices and other agencies can do. And then once we get that funding, then we'll be spending time on setting up, recommending how to set up the programs or things to consider. The good news, we've started having these conversations with agencies last year. End of last year, there's a full-day retreat with agency staff and advocates. So they are aware that we're interested, and we'll be getting a lot of feedback from a lot of folks on getting this stuff set up quickly. There's also, kind of outside the consumer rebates, there's a lot of other programs from the federal level being set up by the state. So bipartisan infrastructure law, you have the EV charging, this, I want to say $7.5 billion in EV charging under the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Grant. So we're involved with MnDOT and getting that plan submitted. We're involved with the weatherization plan that the Department of Commerce also had to submit end of last year. So there's a lot of these other planning processes that are happening that we're also involved with.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering if gas fireplaces would be in the same category as gas stoves, because most people have gas fireplaces.
Clarification about category, are you talking about the health impacts or the incentives? The health impacts. I do not know off the top of my head. Yeah, I think that's.
That's a good question. Yeah. Well,
Most gas fireplaces are sealed combustion, so everything's gonna be going, it won't.
Mine is not. It just has a screen, so it's kind of like a log lighter, but anyway.
yeah, that's a good question. We can do some research. I would imagine that since fireplaces have to like a vent out versus not all gas stoves have to have a vent out somewhere, hopefully it's a little bit less, but that's a good question. We can try to do some research on.
And then the other thing is, which website would be the best to get the information on the amounts of the tax rebates and the credits?
My usual recommendation for that is Rewiring America, and I can look up what the exact location for that is on their website, but they have been at the national level a major advocate, and we had a screenshot of they have an IRA calculator where they break down each credit and have an explanation. So I'll look that up right now for the exact URL.
Yes, Jackie and I were down at the legislature yesterday for Climate Day, and we met with Patty Acom, and she did comment about contractors that part of what they're going to need to do is really do a lot of education of contractors as well as us as consumers. And I thought she had a good suggestion too for consumers to go to your city council and ask them, once the information is available, to put kind of a dashboard up on a city's website so you as a consumer could go to it and figure out, you know, what's my first step? Who are some contractors that I can work with, that kind of thing. So, just for your information.
My question is, do you know if there's any of these rebates are going to be available, like for churches to put in heat pumps?
I guess, yeah, because property owners are eligible for these rebates, so I'd imagine, can't say I know much about how churches are, how the ownership structures are, but theoretically, yes, like the direct rebate should be eligible for a building property, but we can verify that in a follow-up email as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. In designing this presentation, we mostly were focused on consumers, although thinking about the audience, perhaps we could have anticipated that question. Excellent question. Yeah, and we will get back to you on that. Thanks, Anjali, for taking that note. And then I'm gonna just share, sorry, this is a little clunky, but I'm gonna read a web address out loud. So this is that IRA calculator that I mentioned that lists out each and every tax credit and rebate. So that's at rewiringamerica.org. So no dashes or anything, just rewiring.app/IRA-calculator. Yeah. rewiringamerica.org / oh, fantastic. Yeah, it's up there. So that's what it'll look like. rewiringamerica.org /APP/IRA dash, not slash, IRA dash calculator. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I'm looking at Shift to America's car list, and under rebates, they still say to be determined. Do you know if that information is available yet? How much for each particular type of car? And then I do have a second question. Well, let me let you talk about that one.
I have seen some sites pop up now. Don't have it memorized like Eric does, but I can send it in the follow-up email with the slides.
And the other thing is, I was wondering, how do you find out what your area average income, or I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but what that is for an individual?
Yeah, so actually, Minnesota Housing actually has that information pretty readily available. So Minnesota Housing is an agency in Minnesota, and they do a lot of income eligible work. So if you actually just Google AMI Minnesota, usually one of their sites will pop up, but then they'll show you a chart. The IRS, or I think the IRS, or the Federal Housing Agency will kind of create a chart of like, if you have this number of people in your households, this is a kind of equivalent area median income, and they'll have that information out there. But we can also make a note to include that in the follow-up as well.
Are the tax credits or rebates limited to your primary residence?
I believe, so this is a good question. I believe, but thank you for writing that down because I'm definitely going to double check this. I believe it's owner occupied for the tax credits. I also believe that for the rebates, they wouldn't know. But that could also depend on how the state designs the rebate program. So that's my conjecture that I'm sharing right now. But we will confirm that. Thank you for that question.
I have a question about how to respond to people that are resistant to this type of technology. I noticed that Conservation Minnesota put something up on Facebook with this picture of a beautiful moose saying, Minnesota is moving towards 100% clean energy. And then in all the comments, which I punish myself and read them, I don't know why I do that, but at any rate, you know, there's people that are saying, oh, we all know what they say. So I'm wondering if I just responded by putting in your freshenergy.org link in there, just so that people could look up the information. I don't know, it's just so annoying. And we have this huge pot of money, and I don't want to see it just sit there. We need people to get on board, and there's so many out there. I mean, it's a huge education lift, I think.
Boy, no big deal. How to deal with internet trolls? Are you ready for that one?
I have some ideas. It's funny that you bring that up because I think before I became an advocate, I felt the need. I felt the need was to just educate folks. I've realized now it's not always the case. It can be a political identity to be against some of this stuff, so it's not that sharing information will necessarily change minds. The good news is, to the state legislator point, we have a party in control of the governor and the Senate and the House who believe in climate change and want to get something passed, and if we are seeing remarkable speed with this 100% carbon-free energy bill, it's getting voted actually right now on the House floor, so hopefully we'll have some good news maybe at the end of this meeting, and it will likely go to the Senate floor next week, which would be incredible. That's like 6 weeks, and a bill got passed around clean energy. So there's a lot of enthusiasm among legislators to do something, among advocates, and among most Minnesotans. So the trolls can be aggravating, but they actually do not represent most interests of Minnesotans, which is also a really encouraging part of it.
Why doesn't Minnesota have tax credits?
We just got two parties in control of the House and Senate who believe in climate
Well, they're gonna send people back $2,000, so why don't they use that money for something that'll really change one of the issues that they're doing? The other one is, why aren't cities and states requiring these technologies in brand-new houses that are being built for the first time? For example, down in Carver County, which is the biggest fast county growing in Minnesota, they're putting in these large developments of 400, 500, 600 houses. How many of those do you go and see actual solar panels on the roof? So if we're really going to change behavior, we just have to say, no more of this stuff. Any new house that's built has to have the best technology, and it'll reduce the cost of the house because they can get all the rebates right to begin with. So again, going back is a great way to do it, but it's not going to change all the new houses that are going to definitely be built in the next 10 years. And will those new houses just contribute as much as we're trying to take away? So I'm more concerned about the big issue than I am about, to put in a heat pump or that. I mean, we need to do that, but we still have a long way to go.
That's an absolutely great point, and I would love for you to make it in the process of updating the Minnesota Building Code. This is another area that I'm involved in, and oftentimes, we have these conversations, and on one side we have advocates saying we need the highest standards of efficiency, and maybe we could even consider, going all electric, but that's pretty scary to some folks. And then on the other side, we have home builders, the home builders associations who, nothing against the people who build the homes that we live in, but the associations that represent them show up to these proceedings and they say, if you require us to have stricter energy efficiency standards in our new buildings, then housing is going to become unaffordable. So I bang my head against the wall, and I welcome any help in making the case that an efficient building is an affordable building.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, I'm fascinated with the heat pumps, and is that a heat pump? Can that heat my whole house, or do I still need to have? No, it will. Okay.
Yeah. So to go all electric, what you're going to want is you will be looking for a cold climate air source heat pump. Air source just means it's not geothermal, right? Because technically speaking, you could have a ground source heat pump, and that would be geothermal. But if you're just talking about a regular old heat pump that is kind of similar to your air conditioning, that would be air source. So it's outside, it has that same fan. You can have electric resistance heating, which is not, on its own, you would never want to heat your home in Minnesota with electric resistance only. But as a backup source to work with your cold climate air source heat pump, that electric resistance strip is only going to kick in on a very few of the absolute coldest days of the year, so that when you still look overall at your yearly efficiency, it's still going to be super high, even if occasionally it needs to turn on essentially toaster coils, to blow air over those on those deepest of cold days.
And if they're like air conditioners, don't air conditioners have, what is it, HFCs or some kind of a refrigerant in them that is not good?
They do. So that's a huge question, and one that I'm kind of interested in is, what are lower GWP, meaning global warming potential, is that's the metric. So it's all based on carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide has a GWP of 1, a global warming potential of 1. And you're absolutely right. Refrigerants notoriously have very, very high GWPs. So it's important to find lower GWP refrigerants, and it's important not to, bang a hole in your air conditioning and let it all vent out into the atmosphere. But luckily, people who are way smarter than I have done the math, and you do still come out ahead in warming by transitioning to heat pumps, despite the fact that you are working with a small amount of chemical that does have a very high global warming potential.
Okay, and I just wanted to add, because we live in a neighborhood where there's lots of tuck-under garages with all the little hills, and that was the decider for me to get an electric car, because my car was right under my living room and the gases go through anything. So that's another plus of electric cars outside of the carbon cutoffs.
My question is on propane. I've heard on ads saying that it is a clean energy. Is that true?
The question was whether propane is a clean fuel. It is a hydrocarbon like other fossil fuels that when burned emits carbon dioxide and other pollutants. So unfortunately, no. Propane, it's on the list of fossil fuels that we will have to transition away from.
Okay, how about on-demand water heaters?
Pretty energy intensive. Hard to do with electric, which is the only way to make it clean, because if you're burning propane or natural gas, then you're still burning a fossil fuel. I would recommend going towards a traditional electric resistance water heater or a hybrid electric heat pump water heater that is going to use a heat pump, in this case, to heat up the water.
And then a heat pump. I put a heat pump in back in 2006, and it can be serviced by CenterPoint Energy, and also 1 hour heating. They came out and serviced it all the time, so, and it is very efficient.
That's great. Thank you. Yep.
Nora, I wanted to ask you, is this going to be put on our website?
You want us to put this on our website?
Sure.
Yeah, so come on out to the St. Luke website so you can get a copy of that.
That's stluke.mn, and it'll be there like Tuesday.
Yahoo!
Awesome. Thank you again so much.
you take outside air and use that instead? Yes. So if I could rig it somehow so that it's taking outside air and then pumping it back outside. So the fan sucks from outside, heat the water, and. Okay. I don't know whether those are for Minnesota. Well, doesn't a heat pump work even when it's like 26, 20, 10, 20 degrees out?
Depends if it's a central ducted or a mini split. A mini split will get you down to about 20 below, but a central ducted will work to about 5 to 10 below.
I'm contemplating a hybrid electric heat pump water heater.
Heat pump water heater. Oh, yeah.
Heat pump water heater, but
Oh, yeah.
is that gonna cool my basement house and my furnace has to work harder to keep my house warm? So if I
Little
burn
bit,
that
little bit, but you can duct that cold air outside if you want.
Can I? That's what we were just talking about. So if I get a regular hybrid water heater, a hybrid water
You
heater
have to buy one that will accept ducting. But
that will accept ducting.
yeah, you can duct that exhaust cold air into any room in your house, is what I read, but.
Yeah, but
Well, it depends on the unit.
wouldn't I want to suck outside air and then put it back outside because it doesn't affect anything in my house?
Well, in the summertime, you want it blowing cold air into your basement. You want that cold air.
My basement's always cool anyway. My basement's cool.
So you don't run air conditioning? You know?
I don't really need air conditioning.
All right, I'll let you talk. You
No,
know.
but I mean, will it work? Will the hybrid water heater work when it's sucking 0-degree air from outside? That I'm less.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think they're made to take